My brother's voicemail echoed through my car speakers. Mom is in the emergency room. Her heart is failing. The doctors will not operate without a $160,000 deposit. You need to get here right now. I abandoned my corporate summit and shattered every speed limit on the highway. But the moment I reached the hospital corridor, a veteran nurse grabbed my arm and dragged me into a dark supply closet. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Hide right here. In a few minutes, you will understand everything." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you. I am Kendra, 32 years old, and I spent my entire life as the designated bank account for my family. Growing up in Atlanta, our household was governed by a strict hierarchy. My older brother Trey was the undisputed king, the golden child who could do no wrong. My mother Brenda was the enabler, a woman obsessed with church optics and social standing, who would drain her own resources to fund Trey's endless string of failed schemes. And then there was me. I was the scapegoat, the daughter who was too plain, too serious, too focused on books and numbers. I was the one they ignored until the bills were due. I built my career in the shadows, eventually becoming a senior financial auditor for a top firm. I acquired wealth quietly, knowing that if my family ever saw the true extent of my success, they would bleed me dry. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning. I was standing backstage at a massive corporate summit at the convention center. In 10 minutes, I was scheduled to deliver a keynote presentation to an audience of 500 executives. My career had been building toward this exact moment. I was reviewing my flashcards when my phone began to vibrate relentlessly in my blazer pocket. I normally ignore personal calls during work events, but the caller ID showed Trey's name. Trey never called me unless he needed money, and he never called back to back unless he was desperate. I stepped into a quiet alcove and answered. The sound of Trey weeping came through the receiver immediately. "Kendra, you have to get to Atlanta General Hospital right now. It is Mom." Her heart gave out. "They have her in the emergency room." My own heart dropped into my stomach. Despite years of emotional manipulation and financial abuse, she was still my mother. I asked him what happened. Trey's voice cracked perfectly. He told me the doctors said she needed an emergency valve replacement, but the hospital administration was refusing to proceed because her insurance had lapsed. He said they needed a $160,000 deposit wired directly to a medical recovery account by 3 in the afternoon, or she was not going to make it. Rational thought completely vanished. The part of my brain that analyzed financial fraud for a living should have caught the red flags immediately. Hospitals in the United States do not demand six-figure wire transfers before performing life-saving emergency surgery. But panic is a powerful silencer. I dropped my presentation notes on a cocktail table, bypassed my confused director, and sprinted out of the convention center. I threw myself into my car and merged onto the interstate. I broke every speed limit, weaving through heavy mid-morning traffic with my hazard lights flashing. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Trey's frantic voicemail looped in my head. I mentally calculated the balances of my retirement accounts and my emergency portfolios. I was fully prepared to liquidate my entire savings the moment I parked my car. I was ready to ruin my own financial future just to keep my mother breathing. I pulled into the emergency parking lot of Atlanta General Hospital, leaving my car at a crooked angle near the entrance. I ran through the sliding glass doors, my heels clicking loudly against the polished linoleum. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit me, amplifying my nausea. I bypassed the triage desk, completely ignoring a security guard who called out to me. Trey had texted me her room number. Room 412. I sprinted down the corridor, my chest heaving, desperately scanning the numbers on the heavy wooden doors. I was just steps away from room 412 when a firm hand suddenly clamped down on my wrist. I gasped and spun around. A woman in dark blue scrubs pulled me forcefully backward. She was an older African-American woman, a veteran triage nurse with a sharp, no-nonsense expression. Her name tag read Jackie. "Let me go," I pleaded, trying to pull my arm away. "My mother is dying in that room." Nurse Jackie did not let go. Instead, she yanked me into a dark supply closet directly adjacent to room 412 and pulled the door shut behind us. The space was cramped, smelling strongly of bleach and clean linens. I opened my mouth to scream for security, but Nurse Jackie clamped her hand over my mouth. "Stay quiet," she whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto mine in the dim light. "Do not say a word. Hide right here. In a few minutes you will understand everything." I stared at her in absolute shock, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nurse Jackie slowly removed her hand from my mouth and pointed upward. Near the ceiling of the closet was a metal ventilation grate that shared a wall directly with my mother's hospital room. At first, I only heard the low hum of the hospital air conditioning. I braced myself, expecting to hear the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a heart monitor. I expected to hear the frantic voices of doctors fighting to keep my mother alive. Instead, I heard a sound that made my blood run entirely cold. I heard laughter. It was not a small chuckle. It was loud, raucous laughter, the distinct booming laugh of my brother Trey. I stepped closer to the vent, my breath catching in my throat. Another voice joined in. It was Chloe, Trey's white wife. Chloe was a woman who performed extreme allyship in public, but treated me with deep, dripping condescension at every family dinner. I heard the unmistakable clinking of glass against glass. "You really had me going for a second there, Brenda," Chloe said, her voice echoing clearly through the thin metal vent. "I thought you were actually going to pass out in the driveway." A third voice answered. It was my mother. Her tone was not weak or fading. It was robust, vibrant, and completely healthy. "Please," my mother boasted. "I have been practicing that chest grab all morning. Pass me another slice of that red velvet cake, baby. The hospital food here is absolute garbage." I stood frozen in the supply closet. My mother was eating cake. She was not dying. There was no failing heart valve. I looked at Nurse Jackie, who simply gave me a slow, grim nod. She had seen this family grift before. Through the vent, Trey's voice cut through the sound of chewing. "Do you think she actually bought it?" Trey asked. "Do you think Kendra is really going to empty her accounts?" Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Of course she will," Chloe said smoothly. "Kendra is dumb and loyal. She is desperate for your mother's approval. She will liquidate her entire retirement fund today. Just remember the plan, Brenda. When Kendra walks through that door, you clutch your chest. You squeeze your eyes shut and you tell her the insurance denied the transplant. Have her wire the money directly to the limited liability company we set up yesterday." "But why do we need exactly 160,000? My mother asked, her mouth clearly full of cake. Trey let out a heavy sigh. "Mom, I told you. The federal auditors found the discrepancy at my old firm. I am facing 10 years in federal prison for embezzlement if I do not pay that money back by Friday. Kendra is the only one with that kind of cash lying around. She owes us anyway. She has been hoarding her wealth while her own brother struggles." The sheer entitlement in his voice vibrated through the metal grate. The panic that had been suffocating me for the past hour vanished instantly. In its place, a profound, icy clarity took over. I was a senior financial auditor. I spent my days dismantling corporate fraud, tracing hidden assets, and destroying white-collar criminals. And here in a hospital room, my own family had orchestrated a clumsy, pathetic scam to steal my life savings to cover my brother's felony. They were using my love for my mother as a weapon to bankrupt me. I did not shed a single tear. The scapegoat they had mocked and belittled for 3 decades was gone. I turned to Nurse Jackie. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, stepping back to give me room. I reached out and placed my hand on the doorknob of the supply closet. I was going to walk directly into room 412, and I was going to let them play their little game. But they had no idea that the woman walking through that door was about to dismantle their entire lives. The metallic chill of the ventilation grate pressed against my ear as I stood frozen in the cramped hospital supply closet. The heavy scent of industrial bleach and clean linens wrapped around me, but I could barely draw a breath into my lungs. Nurse Jackie stood a few feet away, her arms crossed over her dark blue scrubs, her face a mask of quiet solidarity. She had pulled me into this dark space for a reason. Through the thin metal slats separating the closet from room 412, the sounds of my mother fighting for her life were supposed to be echoing. Instead, the noise filtering through the vent felt like a physical blow to my chest. Someone was chewing loudly. Ice clinked cheerfully against the side of a glass. And then my brother Trey let out a booming, arrogant laugh that rattled the very air around me. "Pass me another slice of that cake, Chloe." Trey said, his voice completely devoid of the frantic panic I had heard on his voicemail just an hour ago. "I cannot believe you actually got the red velvet from that bakery downtown. I thought we were supposed to be laying low." The crisp, unmistakable voice of my sister-in-law answered him. Chloe always spoke with a specific kind of entitled authority, the kind of tone she usually reserved for correcting waiters or giving me unsolicited advice about my hair. "I am not eating hospital cafeteria food while we wait for your sister to show up," Chloe said smoothly. "Besides, we need to keep Brenda's blood sugar up so she has the energy to perform." I stopped breathing. Perform. The word hung in the sterile air of the closet. I pressed my hands flat against the wall to keep my knees from buckling. "My back is absolutely killing me on this cheap mattress," my mother complained. Her voice was vibrant, robust, and entirely healthy. The frail, dying woman Trey had described on the phone did not exist. "How long do I have to lay here hooked up to these fake monitor pads? The adhesive is ruining my skin." "Just focus on the payout," Brenda Chloe snapped, taking complete control of the room. $160,000. It covers the missing funds from Trey's brokerage firm, and it leaves us exactly $20,000 to book that luxury villa in Tulum so we can decompress from all this stress. You can endure a hospital bed for one afternoon if it keeps your son out of a federal penitentiary. My auditor brain trained to detect financial anomalies and trace hidden assets slammed into high gear. The overwhelming grief that had propelled me down the interstate at 100 miles an hour evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. There was no failing heart valve. There was no emergency surgery. The $160,000 was not a medical deposit. It was restitution. Trey had embezzled money from his employer and he was facing federal prison. "I was going to put the money back," Trey whined, displaying the complete lack of accountability that had defined his entire 35 years of life. "The market just took a dive before the quarterly audit. It is not my fault the compliance officer caught the discrepancy. If they had just given me another week, I would have flipped that crypto investment and replaced the capital." "You are highly favored, baby." My mother cooed, her tone dripping with the blind adoration she reserved exclusively for him. "The devil is just attacking your finances because you are destined for greatness. The Lord will provide a ram in the bush. And today, that ram is your sister. She has more than enough money sitting in those fancy retirement accounts. She works at that glass tower downtown wearing those stiff custom suits, acting like she is better than her own blood. It is about time she pays her dues to this family." Every word they spoke dismantled a different piece of my soul. They were not just scamming me, they felt entitled to do it. My mother was using her own fabricated mortality to bankrupt me all to protect her golden child from the consequences of his own felonies. Chloe cut through the religious enabling with cold corporate precision. "Let us review the script one more time," Chloe instructed. "When Kendra walks through that door, you have to look pale, Brenda. Grab your left arm, squeeze your eyes shut, and breathe heavily. Tell her the insurance company completely denied the transplant because of a pre-existing condition. You have to cry. Make her feel like she is watching you slip away." "I can cry on command," my mother scoffed proudly. "I have been practicing the chest grab all morning." "Good," Chloe continued. "Trey, you play the devastated son. Yell at her a little bit. Tell her she needs to step up. When she is sufficiently panicked, I will step in with the iPad. I have the wire transfer forms already loaded. I will tell her the hospital requires a direct wire to a third-party surgical vendor. I set up Medical Recovery Limited Liability Company yesterday afternoon. The routing number goes straight to our offshore holding account. Once the wire clears, we transfer the funds to Trey's compliance officer and the criminal charges disappear." Trey chuckled, the sound grating against my eardrums. "Kendra is so desperate for you to love her mom. She will sign the wire transfer without even reading the fine print. She always falls for the guilt trip. Remember when we made her pay for my destination wedding because you told her it would break your heart if I could not get married in the Bahamas? She took out a personal loan for that. She is dumb and loyal. She will pay." The sheer audacity of the white woman who married into my family, orchestrating a wire fraud conspiracy against me, made my blood boil. Chloe performed extreme allyship on social media, constantly posting about supporting black women, yet here she was legally structuring a shell company to steal my life savings. I slowly pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. My hands were completely steady now. The frantic, terrified daughter had died the moment I heard my mother ask for a slice of cake. I opened my mobile browser and accessed the Georgia Secretary of State Business Registry. I typed in medical recovery. The search results populated instantly. The entity had been formed 24 hours ago. The registered agent listed on the public filing was Chloe. They had actually documented their own conspiracy in the public record. Nurse Jackie leaned in close to me, her voice a barely audible whisper. "They tried a smaller version of this scam last month with your uncle," she murmured. "They claimed your mother needed $10,000 for a specialized kidney treatment, but his credit card declined at the billing desk. I heard them plotting this new angle when I came in to change the trash bins this morning. That is why I intercepted you. I could not let them do this to you." I looked at Nurse Jackie, a stranger who had shown me more protection in 10 minutes than my own mother had shown me in 32 years. "Thank you," I whispered back. "You just saved my life." Through the vent, my mother let out a contented sigh. "As soon as that wire clears the bank, I am checking out against medical advice," she announced. "We are going to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse tonight to celebrate. I want the bone-in ribeye. I am starving." I locked my phone screen and slid it back into my pocket. The lingering desperation to be a good daughter dissolved completely, leaving behind a pristine, untouchable rage. For my entire life, I had contorted myself to fit into the tiny, miserable box they assigned me. I had paid their debts, funded their lifestyles, and absorbed their insults, all hoping that one day they would look at me with the same pride they showered on Trey. But they did not see a daughter or a sister. They saw an automated teller machine. They thought I was dumb and loyal. They thought my grief would blind me to a fraudulent third-party vendor scheme. They had severely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. I was a senior financial auditor. I destroyed people like them for a living. I turned away from the metal vent and faced the heavy door of the supply closet. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored blazer. I smoothed back my hair. I took one final deep breath, letting the sterile hospital air fill my lungs. I pushed the supply closet door open. The heavy click of the latch echoed loudly in the quiet hallway. I stepped out onto the polished linoleum and turned my body directly toward room 412. The game was set. The players were in position. I was going to walk through that door and let them perform their little tragedy. I was going to look my mother in the eyes while she faked her death. But they had absolutely no idea that the woman crossing the threshold was about to dismantle their entire world dollar by stolen dollar. The heavy wooden door to room 412 clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the theater of their deception. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone that completely failed to mask the sheer absurdity of the scene playing out in front of my eyes. Less than 30 seconds ago, my mother had been happily demanding a bone-in ribeye steak from a luxury restaurant. Now, the moment she saw my tailored suit cross the threshold, her entire demeanor violently shifted. Brenda dropped her plastic fork onto the rolling tray table, leaving a smear of crimson frosting across the white napkin. She threw her head back against the pillows and let out a loud, theatrical gasp, clutching her chest with both hands. Her eyes squeezed shut in a display of agony so exaggerated it belonged in a daytime soap opera, not a cardiac ward. She began to moan, rocking her head from side to side. Trey immediately sprang into action. He leaped from the vinyl visitor chair and rushed to her bedside, grabbing her hand with practiced desperation. "Mom, hold on, just breathe," he shouted, looking over his shoulder to glare at me. "Where have you been, Kendra? I called you an hour ago. Her heart is giving out and you are taking your precious time strolling in here like this is a networking event." I stood at the foot of the hospital bed, my face a mask of absolute calm. I took in the details, my auditor brain processing the discrepancies with clinical precision. The heart monitor beside the bed was completely blank, the adhesive sensor pad still sitting unused on the metal tray. My mother breathing was supposedly failing, yet her skin was perfectly flushed, and she still had a noticeable crumb of red velvet cake resting near the corner of her mouth. I moved closer, but I did not rush. I did not drop my bag. I did not cry. The doctors said they need the deposit right now. Trey yelled, his voice vibrating with a calculated, aggressive panic designed to disorient me. The insurance company completely denied the transplant authorization. They said it was a pre-existing condition and they will not cover a single dime. She has hours, Kendra. Hours. My mother let out another trembling groan, peeking through one partially opened eye to gauge my reaction. "Oh Lord," she wailed softly, reaching a hand out into the empty air. "I am so tired, Trey. I just want to rest. Tell your sister not to worry about me. Let me just go home to glory." "Do not say that, Mom," Trey snapped, slamming his hand down on the metal bed rail to create a loud, jarring noise. He turned his full towering height toward me, weaponizing his physical presence the way he had done since we were teenagers. "This is exactly what I am talking about, Kendra. You stand there staring at her like a machine while she is dying. You owe us. You owe this family. Mom sacrificed everything for you, and you have done nothing but hoard your little corporate paycheck while looking down your nose at us." His words were supposed to crush me. They were designed to trigger the deep-seated guilt I had carried for 32 years. "You owe us." It was the same line they used when they demanded I pay off the credit cards Trey maxed out in my name right after college. It was the same justification they used when my mother guilted me into surrendering my first apartment deposit to bail Trey out of a failed real estate scam. "Mom sacrificed everything for you." "Everything for you," Trey continued, taking a step toward me. "She worked her fingers to the bone so you could go to that fancy university and act like you are better than your own blood. You are going to let her die over $160,000. You make that in a year." I did not flinch. I knew the real history. My mother never paid a single tuition bill for my university. I worked double shifts at a campus library and took out massive student loans while she secretly funneled the child support money meant for me directly into Trey's luxury car payments. But they had rewritten our family history so completely they actually believed their own lies. Before Trey could escalate his screaming any further, Chloe stepped out from the shadows near the window. She smoothed down her beige designer sweater and approached me with a look of deep performative sorrow. Her blue eyes were wide, filled with manufactured empathy. "Kendra, sweetie," Chloe said, her voice a soft, cloying whisper designed to sound like the voice of reason. "I know this is incredibly traumatic. Nobody wants to make financial decisions while they are grieving, but we have to be the adults in the room right now. Brenda does not have time for us to process our feelings." Chloe reached over to the rolling table and picked up a sleek leather portfolio. She opened it and pulled out a stack of pristine bank documents, carrying them over to me with delicate precision. "The hospital administration was very clear," Chloe explained, speaking to me as if I were a slow child. "Because of the insurance denial, they require a direct wire transfer to their third-party surgical vendor. It has to be initiated before the banks close at 3 o'clock, or they will discharge her to palliative care. I already filled out the routing numbers and the vendor details. All you have to do is sign at the bottom and initiate the release from your investment app." She pushed the heavy silver pen and the clipboard into my hands. I looked down at the paperwork. The vendor name printed at the top of the wire instructions was Medical Recovery Limited Liability Company. The receiving bank was an offshore branch notorious for instant, untraceable liquidations. "I know it is a lot of money," Chloe murmured, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, a touch that made my skin absolutely crawl. "But wealth is meant to protect the people we love. You have the power to save your mother. Do not let your pride or your financial anxiety get in the way of doing the right thing for this family. We are a team, Kendra. We are going to get through this together." Trey crossed his arms, glaring at me impatiently. "Sign the paper, Kendra. Call your broker right now and liquidate the funds. Stop being a selfish hater for 5 minutes and save Mom's life." My mother let out another timely gasp, clutching the hospital blanket tightly against her chest. "For 32 years, I would have signed the paper. For 32 years, I would have drained my accounts, destroyed my financial security, and set myself back a decade, just to prove to my mother that I was worthy of the love she freely handed to my brother. I would have let Chloe patronize me, and let Trey bully me, because that was the established dynamic of our household. But the woman who walked into room 412 was not the frightened, desperate daughter they thought they were manipulating. I looked at the pen in my hand. I looked at the routing numbers printed on the crisp white paper. I looked at Chloe's expectant, falsely sympathetic face. I did not shed a single tear. I did not tremble. I did not raise my voice or defend my choices. I slowly lowered the clipboard back onto the rolling tray table. I let the silver pen drop beside it with a sharp metallic clatter. "What are you doing?" Trey demanded, his voice pitching up in genuine alarm. "Sign the forms." I ignored him. I reached into the deep leather tote bag hanging from my shoulder and unzipped the main compartment. I pulled out my sleek silver iPad. I pressed my thumb to the sensor, unlocking the screen instantly. "Kendra, this is not the time to check your emails," Chloe said, her mask of patience cracking slightly at the edges. "The bank deadline is in less than an hour." I did not answer her. I opened my mobile browser and connected to the hospital wireless network. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, with practice speed navigating directly to the official government database for the Georgia Secretary of State Corporate Registry. The search bar appeared on the screen, stark and blinking. I typed in the exact name printed on the wire transfer form they had just tried to force me to sign. Medical recovery. The search results populated in a fraction of a second. I tapped the primary document, expanding the registration certificate to full screen. Trey took another aggressive step forward. "Put the tablet away and call your bank right now, or I swear to God I will." He did not get to finish his threat. I turned the iPad screen around, facing it directly toward Trey and Chloe. My eyes locked onto my sister-in-law, her pale face suddenly draining of all remaining color as she recognized the official state seal glowing on my screen. The trap they thought they had set for me was about to snap shut on their own necks. "That is wild, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy hospital air like a scalpel. I kept the tablet screen perfectly steady, making sure she could read every single line of the public filing. Because Medical Recovery Limited Liability Company is not a hospital surgical vendor. It is not an insurance liaison. It was incorporated exactly 24 hours ago, and the sole registered agent is you. Chloe stepped back, her manicured hand flying to her throat. The performative empathy melted off her face, replaced by a raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at Trey, her eyes wide, silently begging him to fix the mess she had just been caught in. "Did you really think I would not check?" I asked, taking a deliberate step forward, forcing Chloe to retreat until her back hit the vinyl visitor chair. "I am a senior financial auditor. I track shell companies and offshore accounts for multinational corporations. You used a free legal website to register a fraudulent medical entity in the state of Georgia, and you used your own home address for the filing. You did not even try to hide your digital footprint. Kendra, listen, you do not understand the logistics of medical debt." Chloe stammered, her voice losing its soft, cloying pitch. "The hospital requires a third party to handle uninsured deposits. I was just trying to facilitate the transfer so your mother could get her surgery faster." "Stop lying," I snapped. "There is no surgery. There is no failing heart valve. I know about the federal indictment, Trey. I know about the $160,000 you embezzled from your brokerage firm." The fake tears vanished from Trey's face instantly. The facade of the terrified, grieving son evaporated in a fraction of a second, leaving behind the arrogant, entitled bully I had known my entire life. He did not deny the embezzlement. He did not apologize. Instead, his posture shifted. He squared his shoulders, puffed out his chest, and marched directly into my personal space, towering over me to use his height for intimidation. "You went digging into my private business," Trey shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "You always have to ruin everything. You could never just be a supportive sister. You always have to play the smart one, the investigator, the one trying to make me look bad. You made yourself look bad when you committed a federal crime." I fired back, refusing to break eye contact or step away. "You stole $160,000, and now you are trying to steal my life savings to cover your tracks." "It is not stealing if it stays in the family," Trey yelled, his face turning a dark, furious shade of red. "I needed capital to cover a bad investment. The market turned on me. It is a temporary cash flow problem, and you have more money than you know what to do with. But you are too selfish to help your own brother." Help you, I let out a dry, bitter laugh. I paid off your credit cards when you maxed them out in my name right after I graduated. I lost my first apartment deposit because I bailed you out of that real estate scam 5 years ago. I have been funding your lifestyle since we were teenagers. Because you owe me. Trey leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with anger. You have always been a bitter, jealous hater. You sit in your glass office looking down on us, but you are just mad because Mom loves me more. She has always loved me more. I am the son. I am the golden child. I am the one carrying this family name. You are just the backup plan. You are supposed to support me. That is your role. He continued his tirade, his voice dripping with venom. You think your corporate job makes you special. You think tracking numbers makes you better than me. I take risks. I build things. I am an entrepreneur. You just hoard your little paychecks. Mom knows I am destined for greatness, and she knows you are just a tool to help me get there. You have no husband. You have no children. What else are you going to do with that retirement fund? You have zero legacy. I am the legacy of this family. If I go to federal prison, this entire family is destroyed. You are destroying us over your petty, pathetic jealousy. The sheer delusion was breathtaking. He was standing in a hospital room orchestrating wire fraud against his own sister, and he had convinced himself that he was the victim. He believed his own mythology. Chloe nodded along with him, her arms crossed defensively, silently validating every toxic word coming out of his mouth. I waited for my mother to intervene. Part of me, that small wounded inner child that still desperately craved maternal protection, hoped she would tell Trey to stop. I hoped she would realize how monstrous this had become. I looked toward the hospital bed. Brenda was no longer clutching her chest. The agonizing groans had completely stopped. She reached up and casually ripped the heart monitor sticker off her collarbone, tossing it onto the rolling tray table next to the remains of her red velvet cake. She hit the button on the side of her bed, raising the mattress until she was sitting perfectly upright. There was no shame in her eyes. There was no guilt for being caught faking her own death. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated authority. Your brother is absolutely right, Kendra, my mother said, her voice sharp and commanding, carrying the full weight of the matriarch. You are acting completely out of line. I stared at her, the final thread of my familial loyalty, snapping cleanly in two. Mom, he is trying to steal my life savings. He committed a felony. Hi, Maud, a business mistake, Brenda corrected sharply, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. A mistake that you have the power to fix right now. The Lord blessed you with that high-paying job so you could be a blessing to your family. To whom much is given, much is required. I did not raise you to be a stingy, heartless woman. You raised me to be his personal bank account. I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound betrayal. You faked a heart attack, Mom. You let me believe you were dying. I ran out of a conference. I broke every speed limit getting here because I thought I was going to lose you. And you were eating cake, plotting how to drain my retirement fund. Do not you dare speak to me in that disrespectful tone, Brenda shouted, slapping her hand down on the hospital mattress. I carried you for 9 months. I put a roof over your head. I fed you and clothed you. You owe me your very existence. And if I tell you that your brother needs $160,000 to stay out of a cage, then you will open your phone, you will log into your little investment account, and you will send that money. Or what I challenged, stepping away from Trey and moving toward the foot of the bed. Or you will answer to God for tearing this family apart, Brenda declared, wielding her religion like a blunt instrument. You will be responsible for sending a black man to the prison system. Do you know what they do to our men in there? You want that on your conscience? You want your brother's blood on your hands just so you can keep a few extra zeros in a bank account you do not even need. Chloe chimed in again, stepping up to the bed rails to align herself with my mother. We are trying to protect Trey from a system designed to destroy him, Kendra. As a black woman, you should understand the importance of keeping him out of the justice system. We have to share our resources. You are weaponizing your wealth against your own people. The audacity of Chloe, a white woman from a privileged background, lecturing me about the justice system while actively committing wire fraud pushed me past the point of anger into a state of absolute freezing detachment. My mother sat straight up, smoothing down her hospital gown as if it were a Sunday church dress. She glared at me, expecting me to fold. She expected the guilt trip to work just like it always had. She expected the religious manipulation and the maternal commands to break my spirit and force my compliance. Pay the money. Kendra Brenda ordered, her finger pointing straight at my chest. Pay the money right now, or you are no daughter of mine. The words echoed off the sterile walls of the hospital room. You are no daughter of mine. A younger version of me would have crumbled right there on the linoleum floor. I would have reached for my phone, frantically transferring the funds, begging for her forgiveness, apologizing for making her upset. But the woman standing in front of that hospital bed was immune to her poison. I looked at the finger pointing at my chest, then up to the face of the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. You want to talk about being a daughter? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. You want to talk about family? Brenda did not back down. She thrust her chin into the air, leaning forward on the mattress she was using as a prop for her extortion. I gave you life, Kendra. I carried you in my womb for 9 months. I went into labor on a Tuesday and suffered through 30 hours of agony to bring you into this world. I put food on your plate when I did not have a dime to my name. You owe me the very air in your lungs. And now, when your own brother is facing the destruction of his life, you want to stand there and interrogate us over some paperwork. You are going to watch a black man get swallowed by the prison system because you are too cheap to share the wealth God gave you. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the mental gymnastics. She was weaponizing my race, my gender, and my faith all in the same breath. God did not give me this wealth, Mom, I replied evenly. I gave up my 20s working 100-hour weeks while you were co-signing auto loans for a son who refused to hold down a job. I built my career. I earned my money. It does not belong just to you, Brenda screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. We are supposed to build generational wealth. That wealth needs to stay with the men of this family. Trey is the head of this household. He is the one who will carry on our legacy. The world is out to get him every single day. He made a tiny mistake at his job, and they are trying to crucify him for it. You have the privilege of sitting in a safe corporate office playing with spreadsheets. You do not know what he faces out there. You have a duty to protect him. You are supposed to lift him up. That is what a good sister does. That is what a strong black family does. You pool your resources and you protect your men. The sheer level of delusion was staggering. She was entirely willing to sacrifice my financial security, my future, and my mental health just to shield a 35-year-old criminal from facing the consequences of embezzling $160,000. She saw my success as nothing more than a communal safety net for Trey's failures. I opened my mouth to respond, but Chloe stepped directly into my line of sight. She held up both her hands, palms facing outward, in a gesture that was practically dripping with condescension. She tilted her head, putting on a soft, agonizingly patient expression. Kendra, let us all just take a deep breath, Chloe murmured softly. I feel like you are coming at this from a place of unhealed generational trauma. We are trying to create a safe space here to solve a family crisis, but your energy is incredibly aggressive right now. You are acting very hostile toward your mother, and it is creating a really toxic environment. My gaze snapped to Chloe. The absolute audacity of this woman was blinding. She had married my brother 3 years ago because she thought he was a wealthy investment banker. She had spent every family gathering since then talking down to me, offering me unsolicited advice on how to improve my tone, how to be more approachable, how to soften my image so I would not come across as an angry black woman to my corporate colleagues. And now, while standing in the middle of a fraudulent medical scheme she had personally orchestrated, she was trying to gaslight me, using weaponized therapy speak. Chloe, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Do not ever use the word aggressive to describe me when you just registered a fake medical corporation to steal my retirement fund. You are not a mediator. You are a co-conspirator. You are literally holding the fraudulent wire transfer forms in your hands. Do not try to psychoanalyze me while you are actively committing a felony. Chloe gasped, taking a dramatic step back and clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Trey immediately lunged forward, placing himself between me and his wife. Do not you dare talk to my wife like that, Trey roared. She is trying to help this family. She is doing more to save Mom and me than you ever have. You are completely out of control, Kendra. You have let a little bit of money turn you into a toxic, bitter person. You are dead to us. Do you hear me? Keep your stupid money. We do not need you. We will find another way to handle my compliance officer. Mom is right. You are no daughter to her, and you are no sister to me. Get out of this room before I call hospital security and have you thrown out for harassing a patient. I looked at the three of them. Trey standing tall and furious, puffing his chest out to defend the woman who was helping him rob his own family. Chloe cowering behind his shoulder, playing the fragile victim. And my mother sitting upright in the hospital bed, her face twisted into a mask of pure resentment and disgust. They had played their final card. They had threatened me with the ultimate punishment, excommunication from the family. For decades, that threat had kept me in line. For decades, the fear of losing my mother's love had forced me to write checks, co-sign leases, and swallow my pride. But standing there, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of room 412, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. They could not hurt me anymore. They had just shown me exactly who they were, and there was no going back. I am leaving, I said calmly. I adjusted the strap of my leather tote bag on my shoulder. But before I go, I think there is one crucial piece of financial information you all seem to have forgotten in your rush to orchestrate this little stage play. I walked slowly past Trey. He tensed, ready for a fight, but I ignored him completely. I stepped right up to the side of the hospital bed. I leaned in close to my mother. I could smell the sweet, sugary scent of the red velvet cake lingering on her breath. She stared back at me, her eyes narrowing with defiance. She still thought she had the upper hand. She still thought she had a backup plan. "Mom," I whispered, keeping my voice so low that Trey and Chloe had to strain to hear me. "You spent the last 20 minutes telling me how much I owe you. You told me to protect the family wealth. But you forgot something very important about how that wealth is structured." Brenda frowned, a flicker of uncertainty finally breaking through her arrogant facade. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that made her instinctively pull back against the pillows. "5 years ago," I whispered. 5 years ago, when you nearly lost the house because Trey convinced you to invest your savings into his failed logistics company. You asked me to set up an emergency fund for you. You asked me to manage your remaining liquid assets because you said you did not trust yourself with the banking details. My mother's eyes widened. I saw the exact moment the realization hit her. The color rapidly drained from her face. "You signed the authorization paperwork," I continued smoothly. "You made me the primary account holder. You gave me full executive control over the account that holds every single dollar you have left to your name. The account you were probably planning to drain tomorrow morning when you realized my wire transfer was never going to arrive." Trey stepped forward, panic creeping into his voice. "What did you do, Kendra? What did you do?" I kept my eyes locked entirely on my mother. "I did what any responsible financial auditor would do when they uncover an active wire fraud conspiracy," I whispered. "While I was standing in the hallway outside this room listening to you laugh about eating cake and booking a villa in Tulum, I opened my banking app. I froze the account, Mom. Every single cent is locked. You cannot transfer it. You cannot withdraw it. You cannot use it to pay Trey's restitution. It is gone." Brenda let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She lunged forward, her hands grasping desperately at the lapels of my blazer. "You ungrateful little witch," she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "Unfreeze that account right now. That is my money. You have no right." I smoothly stepped back, letting her hands swipe through empty air. "I have every legal right," I replied, my voice echoing clearly across the room. "As the primary account holder, I flagged the funds for suspicious activity. The bank will hold them in escrow, pending a full fraud investigation. An investigation that I will personally trigger if you or Trey ever try to contact my employer or my brokerage firm again." I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy wooden door. Behind me, the room erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Chloe was practically hyperventilating, dropping the clipboard and frantically pulling out her phone. Trey was shouting, slamming his fists against the rolling tray table, sending the plastic water pitcher crashing to the floor. My mother was wailing, genuinely crying now, demanding that Trey stop me, demanding that I come back and fix the mess I had just made. I did not look back. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the brightly lit hospital corridor. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, muting their screams into a dull, distant roar. I walked past the triage desk, past the security guard, and out through the sliding glass doors into the warm Atlanta air. I had drawn the battle lines. I had cut off their supply. But as I walked to my car, my mind already calculating their next move, I knew the war had just begun. They were desperate, and desperate people always try one last spectacular ambush. I just needed to be ready when they did. It had been exactly 72 hours since I walked out of Atlanta General Hospital and left my mother faking a cardiac event in room 412. 3 days of absolute radio silence from my phone. I knew the silence was the calculated tactical maneuver on their part. They were waiting for me to crack. They expected the crushing weight of daughterly guilt to break my resolve, forcing me to apologize and unfreeze the emergency funds. But I spent those 3 days doing what I do best. I transferred my personal assets to fortified accounts, updated my security protocols, and methodically moved forward with my life. There was only one loose end tying me to that toxic household. My late grandfather left me a vintage gold pocket watch before he passed away. He pressed it into my hand and told me I was the only person in the family who truly understood the value of time. I knew that if Trey got desperate enough to avoid his federal embezzlement charges, he would pawn that watch to pay his legal retainer. I could not let that happen. I pulled up to the sprawling brick estate in Buckhead at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I assumed the house would be completely empty. My mother never missed a Sunday service at her megachurch across town, and they usually lingered for hours at the fellowship brunch afterward to maintain their pristine public image. I planned to use my spare key, grab the watch from the hallway safe, and be gone in under 5 minutes. I was entirely wrong. The long, sweeping, circular driveway was completely packed bumper to bumper with cars. I immediately recognized my Aunt Valerie's silver sedan, Uncle David's heavy-duty truck, and the pristine black luxury SUV that belonged to Deacon Calvin from the church board. My stomach tightened into a hard knot, but I did not put my car in reverse. I was not going to let them hold my grandfather's memory hostage just because they wanted to play games. I parked on the street, grabbed my leather tote bag, and marched up the brick steps. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open, stepping directly into a solid wall of sound and the overwhelming heavy aroma of a traditional Sunday dinner. The smell of smothered chicken, collard greens, and baked macaroni and cheese filled the air. The entire extended family was crammed into the formal dining room, overflowing into the grand foyer. The loud, animated chatter stopped the absolute second my heels clicked against the hardwood floor. 30 pairs of eyes locked onto me simultaneously. It was not a family gathering. It was a highly coordinated firing squad. Aunt Valerie stood by the arched entryway, holding a glass casserole dish, her face contorted into a mask of bitter, righteous disappointment. Uncle David sat in the velvet armchair by the window, shaking his head slowly back and forth, as if a convicted criminal had just walked into his courtroom. And sitting at the head of the massive mahogany dining table, flanked by 2 senior deacons from the church, was my mother. Brenda was draped in a dark, somber floral dress, clutching a white lace handkerchief to her chest. She was playing the role of the fragile, long-suffering matriarch to absolute terrifying perfection. Chloe was standing right behind her chair. My white sister-in-law was playing the dedicated, exhausted caregiver, gently rubbing my mother's shoulders while shooting me a look of pure, venomous triumph over Brenda's head. Trey sat on the other side of the table, looking appropriately somber and deeply distressed, playing the role of the fiercely protective son trying to hold his broken family together. They had orchestrated a full-scale intervention, using the church board and our blood relatives as their personal jury and executioners. Before I could even ask where my grandfather's watch was, Deacon Calvin stood up from his chair. He adjusted his suit jacket and looked down at me with heavy pastoral judgment. Kendra, he boomed, his deep voice echoing through the sudden suffocating quiet of the house. Your mother called us here today because this family is in a terrible spiritual crisis. We gathered this congregation to pray the hardness and the greed right out of your heart. I stared at him, keeping my posture rigid and my expression perfectly neutral. I stepped fully into the dining room, refusing to be intimidated by the sheer volume of people staring me down. What exactly did she tell you? Deacon Calvin? Calvin, I asked, my voice calm, icy, and steady. My mother let out a loud theatrical sob, burying her face into her lace handkerchief and shaking her shoulders for dramatic effect. She told us the absolute truth, Aunt Valerie snapped, stepping forward to physically block my path to the staircase. She told us how you marched into her hospital room while she was fighting for her very life, and you froze her bank accounts. You locked up her own money because you have always been violently jealous of your brother. She told us you abandoned her on her deathbed and laughed in her face. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie actually made me pause. Brenda was not just covering up Trey's federal crimes. She had spun a masterclass narrative to completely destroy my reputation in the community. She was using the exact details of what they did to me, twisting the narrative so she became the victim. Uncle David pointed a thick finger at me from his armchair. You are an absolute disgrace to this community, Kendra. We all know you make good money at that fancy corporate firm downtown. We all know you live in a luxury apartment. And yet you let the woman who gave you life suffer in a hospital bed because you are too arrogant to help pay her medical bills. You forgot where you came from. You forgot who raised you. I looked at Uncle David, a man who had borrowed $5,000 from me 3 years ago and never paid back a single cent. I looked at Aunt Valerie, who constantly criticized my career while secretly asking me to review her tax returns for free. They were entirely willing to tear me down because my independence threatened their dysfunction. Chloe stepped out from behind my mother's chair, holding up her hands in a gesture of false peace. She tilted her head, utilizing her soft, weaponized therapy speak to manipulate the church members in the room. We do not want to attack you, Kendra, Chloe murmured, making sure her voice sounded incredibly gentle and patient. We just want to create a safe space for you to heal your toxic individualism. You have allowed capitalism to disconnect you from your roots. We need you to surrender that anger and do the right thing for your mother's healing journey. The blinding hypocrisy of a woman who just registered a fake medical corporation to commit wire fraud lecturing me about toxic individualism was almost too much to bear. But I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against the chorus of judgment raining down on me. I kept my eyes locked on the woman sitting at the head of the table. Brenda looked up from her lace handkerchief, her eyes shining with perfectly manufactured tears. She looked at the deacons, then at her siblings, ensuring she had their complete, undivided attention before delivering her final devastating blow. I prayed for you every single night, Kendra. Brenda cried out, her voice cracking with spectacular precision. I sacrificed my youth, my money, and my body to raise a successful black woman, and the corporate world turned you into a cold, soulless monster. The doctors told me my heart simply cannot take this kind of betrayal. You are literally letting me die of stress-induced heart failure right in front of your own family because you care more about your investment portfolios than your own mother's life. The sheer audacity of my mother claiming I was murdering her with financial boundaries hung heavy over the dining room table. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered congregation of family members and church deacons. Aunt Valerie clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with manufactured horror, while the deacons shook their heads in solemn disappointment. They were looking at me as if I held a smoking gun, completely blind to the fact that the woman sitting at the head of the table was the actual mastermind of her own demise. Uncle David rose from his velvet armchair. He was a large man who used his physical size and his booming baritone voice to intimidate anyone who dared to question the family hierarchy. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at my face. You are a disgrace to this family and to this entire community, Uncle David thundered. His voice shook the crystal glasses on the dining table. We watched you grow up. We poured our prayers and our resources into you. We celebrated when you got that fancy job in the financial district. We thought you were going to be the one to lift us all up. But look at you now. You stand there in your expensive clothes holding onto your purse strings while your own mother suffers. You let that corporate world poison your spirit. You have forgotten your roots. You have turned your back on the very people who built the foundation you walk on. I stared at him without blinking. Uncle David had not poured a single resource into my upbringing. In fact, 3 years ago, he came to my apartment begging for $5,000 to save his failing landscaping business. I gave him the money out of a misplaced sense of duty. He never paid back a single cent yet. Here he was standing in my mother's dining room, appointing himself as the moral authority on my financial obligations. Aunt Valerie immediately chimed in, stepping closer to Uncle David to form a united front. "It is true, Kendra," she snapped. "You have become so arrogant. You think because you track numbers for a living that you can audit human compassion. Your brother Trey has been working day and night, trying to keep this family afloat, trying to innovate and create wealth for all of us. And the moment he hits a rough patch, the moment your mother experiences a medical emergency, you slam the door in their faces, you froze her bank accounts. What kind of daughter does that? What kind of person treats their own flesh and blood like a hostile corporate takeover?" I kept my posture completely rigid. I did not raise my hands to defend myself. I did not raise my voice to argue. I knew exactly what they were doing. This was the classic tactic of the enabler. When the golden child fails, the enablers will always attack the scapegoat to distract from the truth. They needed a villain, so they did not have to face the reality of Trey and his endless destructive failures. They needed to make me the monster so my mother could remain the saint. And then the most infuriating voice in the room joined the chorus. Chloe uncrossed her legs and leaned forward. She was sitting at the head of the table, a position usually reserved for the matriarch, but my mother had graciously allowed her to take the seat of honor. Chloe held a glass of expensive red wine, swirling the dark liquid slowly. She looked at me with a condescending, sorrowful smile that made my blood boil. As a white woman who had married into our family just 3 years prior, she had consistently appointed herself as the supreme authority on our cultural dynamics. "Kendra, we really need you to listen to what is being said here today," Chloe began. Her voice was soft, measured, and dripping with weaponized therapy speak. She spoke to me as if she were a counselor trying to de-escalate a violent patient. "Nobody here hates you. We are all just deeply wounded by your actions. You are operating from a place of severe toxic individualism." I felt my jaw clench, but I remained perfectly silent, letting her dig her own grave. "You have assimilated so deeply into corporate culture that you have lost your sense of community," Chloe continued, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "In this family, we practice communal support. When Trey struggles, we all pin to help him find his footing. When Brenda has a health crisis, we do not ask for receipts. We provide care. But you are prioritizing your personal wealth over collective survival. You need to heal your toxic individualism, Kendra. You need to decenter your ego and recognize that your money is not just yours. It belongs to the family ecosystem. If you do not break down these walls of selfishness, you are going to end up completely alone." Trey nodded enthusiastically from his seat across the table. "Listen to my wife, Kendra. She is trying to save you from yourself. We just want you to do the right thing. Give Mom back access to her accounts today, and we can start the healing process. We can forgive you for the disrespect you showed us at the hospital." The sheer, unadulterated delusion radiating from the table was almost mesmerizing. They had invited church leaders and extended relatives to witness my public execution. They had dressed up their greed in the language of faith, community, and psychological healing. They expected me to break down crying. They expected the weight of social pressure and public humiliation to crush my boundaries. They genuinely believed that if enough people yelled at me, I would open my banking app and transfer $160,000 to a shell company to keep Trey out of a federal penitentiary. I looked around the room. I looked at the deacons shaking their heads. I looked at Aunt Valerie glaring at me with raw contempt. I looked at Uncle David standing tall with false righteous indignation. I looked at my mother, who was still clutching her lace handkerchief, peeking out from behind the fabric to gauge my reaction. Finally, my eyes locked onto Chloe, who was taking another smug sip of her wine, entirely satisfied with her performance. I did not argue. I did not attempt to defend my character. Explaining the truth to people who are committed to a lie is a waste of breath, and I was done wasting my breath on this family. I slowly reached down to my side. I grabbed the thick, heavy zipper of my black leather tote bag and pulled it open. The sharp sound of the metal zipper echoed loudly in the sudden quiet of the dining room. Everyone stopped talking. The deacons leaned forward, perhaps expecting me to pull out a checkbook. Trey sat up straighter, a greedy, expectant glimmer flashing in his eyes. My mother lowered her handkerchief, waiting for the surrender she was so certain she had secured. I reached my hand deep into the bag. I bypassed my wallet. I bypassed my car keys. My fingers closed around a thick, heavy stack of manila folders that I had prepared the night before. I pulled the entire stack out of the bag and held it up for a fraction of a second. Then, with a swift, deliberate motion, I tossed the heavy stack of folders directly onto the center of the formal dining table. The folders hit the table with a loud, wet smack, landing directly in the middle of a massive crystal bowl of mashed potatoes. Gravy splashed outward, dotting the pristine white tablecloth. A chorus of shocked gasps erupted from the aunts and uncles. My mother jumped back in her chair. Chloe dropped her wine glass onto the table, the red liquid spilling across the wood. But I did not care about the mess. The ambush was over. It was my turn to speak. The heavy thud of the manila folders hitting the bowl of mashed potatoes echoed like a gunshot in the silent dining room. Droplets of butter and gravy splattered across the pristine white tablecloth, staining the delicate lace my mother reserved exclusively for the church leadership. Nobody moved. Aunt Valerie's mouth was hanging slightly open. Uncle David's thick finger, which had been pointing at my face just seconds ago, slowly lowered to his side. Chloe sat frozen at the head of the table, her glass of red wine suspended halfway to her lips. I did not rush. I reached into the center of the table, grasped the top folder, and pulled it toward me. I calmly wiped a smudge of gravy off the federal seal stamped on the front cover. Then I opened it. "You want to talk about community support?" I said, my voice echoing clearly in the stunned silence. "You want to talk about healing my toxic individualism? Let us do exactly that. Let us talk about where the community resources are actually going." I pulled out a stack of crisp, freshly printed documents and began passing them around the table. I handed the first packet directly to Deacon Calvin. I slid the second packet toward Uncle David. I tossed the third right in front of Aunt Valerie. "Read it aloud," I instructed, keeping my eyes locked on Chloe. "Go ahead, Aunt Valerie. Read the bold print at the top of the page." Aunt Valerie picked up the stapled packet. Her hands were visibly trembling as she adjusted her reading glasses. "United States District Court." She read, her voice wavering, completely stripped of its previous righteous indignation. "Federal indictment. Wire fraud. Corporate embezzlement. Defendant Trey." A collective gasp sucked all the air out of the dining room. My mother let out a shrill, panicked shriek and lunged forward, trying to grab the papers out of Aunt Valerie's hands. But Uncle David intercepted her. He snatched the document away, his eyes scanning the pages with mounting horror. "That is right," I said, pacing slowly around the perimeter of the dining table. "My brother is not an innovative entrepreneur going through a rough patch. He is a federal criminal. He embezzled $160,000 from his previous employer, a brokerage firm that fired him 3 weeks ago. He has until this Friday to pay the restitution, or he is going to spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary." "That is a lie!" Chloe shouted, suddenly slamming her wineglass down so hard the stem nearly snapped. Her face was flushed a deep, ugly red. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. "She is fabricating these documents. Kendra works in finance. She knows how to forge this kind of paperwork. This is a targeted attack on a black man because she is jealous of his success." I turned to Chloe and smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "If you are going to weaponize my race against me, Chloe, you should probably make sure your own financial disclosures are not sitting in the next folder." I reached into the stack and pulled out a different packet, tossing it directly onto Chloe's empty dinner plate. "That is your personal credit card statement from last month," I announced to the room. "While my mother was allegedly suffering from stress-induced heart failure, and while you two were begging the extended family for emergency loans to keep your lights on, Chloe charged $40,000 to a Chase Sapphire card. Feel free to look at the itemized deductions, Deacon Calvin. They include first-class flights to Mexico, a private luxury villa in Tulum, daily couples massages, and a private chef." Deacon Calvin looked down at the paper I had handed him, his expression turning from pastoral concern to absolute disgust. He looked at my mother, then at Trey. "You asked the church for a benevolence offering last Sunday," the deacon said, his deep voice thick with betrayal. "You stood at the altar and wept, Brenda. You said the devil was attacking your household finances, and you could not afford your blood pressure medication. She is lying, my mother screamed, her voice cracking. She stood up, clutching her chest, falling back into her theatrical performance from the hospital. My heart. The stress is killing me. Can you not see what this wicked girl is doing? She is trying to send me to an early grave. Nobody rushed to her side. Aunt Valerie, who had been guarding the staircase just moments ago, took a slow, deliberate step away from my mother. Stop clutching your chest, Mom, I commanded, my voice slicing through her fake cries. You are not dying. You do not have heart failure. The only thing failing in this house is your elaborate cover-up. You orchestrated this entire Sunday dinner. You brought the church deacons here to guilt-trip me into liquidating my retirement fund because you thought public humiliation would break my boundaries. You are not a victim. You are aiding and abetting a federal fugitive. The silence that followed was absolute. The illusion was entirely shattered. The pristine image my mother had cultivated for 30 years, the image of the devout, perfect matriarch, with her flawless golden son, and his supportive, socially conscious wife, lay in ruins across the gravy-stained tablecloth. Uncle David dropped the indictment papers onto the table. He looked at Trey. The disappointment in his eyes was visceral. I gave you the last of my savings 2 months ago. Uncle David said, his voice dangerously low. You looked me in the eye and told me you had a guaranteed investment property. You stole from your own family to cover up what you stole from your job. Trey had been sitting completely still, his eyes darting between the federal indictment papers and the faces of the deacons. I expected him to break. I expected him to fall to his knees, beg for forgiveness, and play the misunderstood victim. I expected him to blame the corporate system, to cry about the pressure of being the man of the house, to use every manipulative tactic our mother had taught him. Instead, Trey leaned back in his heavy wooden dining chair. He let out a slow, deep breath, and then he began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle in the back of his throat, dark and entirely inappropriate for the destruction happening around him. The laughter grew louder, filling the stunned silence of the dining room. He reached up casually, smoothing his tie, and looked around the table at the disgusted faces of his aunts, his uncles, and the church leaders. He did not look ashamed. He looked incredibly, terrifyingly amused. Trey, Uncle David barked, "Have you lost your mind? What is funny about going to federal prison?" Trey ignored our uncle completely. He slowly stood up, placing both his hands flat on the mahogany table. He locked his eyes directly onto mine. The panic that had driven his frantic hospital phone calls was entirely gone. The desperate bully who had screamed at me in room 412 had been replaced by a man who radiated pure, unshakable arrogance. "You really put a lot of work into this," Kendra Trey said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You printed out the federal seals. You gathered the credit card statements. You came in here ready to play the brilliant, untouchable auditor who exposes the bad guys and saves the day. You thought you had us completely cornered, did you not?" I stared at him, my instincts flaring. This was not the reaction of a man who had just been publicly destroyed. This was the reaction of a man who was holding a trump card. "You are done, Trey," I said, keeping my posture rigid. "The church knows. The family knows." I froze Mom's emergency accounts. "You have no capital and you have no way out." Trey's smile widened into a malicious, triumphant grin. Chloe, who had been hyperventilating near the head of the table, suddenly stopped crying. She looked at Trey, and a slow, smug smirk spread across her tear-stained face. She reached for her wine glass, wiping a drop of spilled red wine from the base, and took a long, victorious sip. "You think you are so smart?" Trey sneered, stepping out from behind his chair and walking slowly toward me. "You think your little financial freezes and your public ambushes mean anything to me. You are so busy looking backward at what we spent, you did not even bother to look at what we secured today." He stopped just inches from me, looking down with a superiority that made my skin crawl. "We do not need your money anymore," Kendra Trey whispered, making sure the entire room could hear him. "Keep your pathetic retirement fund. We already handled the problem." Trey stood at the edge of the dining table, radiating a toxic level of triumph. His custom-tailored jacket pulled tightly across his shoulders as he crossed his arms, staring down at me with the kind of smug satisfaction usually reserved for a conquering king. The silence in the room was so absolute that I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. We handled the problem, Trey repeated, letting the words roll off his tongue slowly so everyone in the room could hear his victory. You thought you had us completely paralyzed when you froze Mom's emergency accounts. You thought you were the only person in this family with financial literacy. You walked in here today fully expecting us to beg on our knees for your corporate salary. But you underestimated my resourcefulness. I am an entrepreneur, Kendra. I find solutions while you just manage spreadsheets. I kept my expression entirely blank. What exactly did you do, Trey? I asked, my voice flat and devoid of the panic he was so desperately trying to provoke. Trey let out a sharp, arrogant laugh. He walked over to my mother and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder. Mom and I had a very long, very productive conversation after you threw your little temper tantrum at the hospital, he said. We realized that we do not need to rely on a bitter, jealous daughter who weaponizes her bank account. Mom owns this beautiful, sprawling estate in Buckhead, free and clear. It is the family legacy. So we leveraged our legacy to protect our future. My auditor brain immediately calculated the trajectory of his words, but I let him continue to dig his own grave. We went to the bank yesterday morning, Trey announced proudly. Mom's HEO signed a reverse mortgage on the house. The equity in this property is massive. The loan officer practically rolled out the red carpet for us when he saw the appraisal value. We secured a lump sum cash advance against the estate. The wire transfer for $160,000 hit my attorney's escrow account at 9 o'clock this morning. The federal restitution is fully paid. My legal slate is wiped completely clean. A collective murmur rippled through the dining room. Uncle David shifted heavily in his velvet armchair, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Aunt Valerie dropped her gaze to the gravy-stained tablecloth, suddenly unable to look me in the eye. They had just heard irrefutable proof that Trey had committed a federal crime, yet they were sitting in stunned silence because Trey had managed to magically fix the situation using my mother's supposed wealth. In their eyes, the golden child had sinned, but the golden child had also saved himself. My mother adjusted her dark floral dress and sat up incredibly straight. The fragile weeping victim routine she had performed for the church deacons was entirely gone. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated spite. Her eyes were hard and shining with pride for the son who had just bankrupted her supposed future to save his own skin. Your brother is a visionary, Brenda declared, her voice ringing out with defiant authority. He did what a real man does. He found a way to provide for and protect this family without relying on outside help. I gladly signed those papers. I would sign them 100 times over. That is what a mother's love looks like, Kendra. A real mother sacrifices her comfort to ensure her son's survival. Trey is destined for greatness, and this house is just brick and mortar compared to his freedom. She pointed a manicured finger at the stack of federal indictment papers resting in the mashed potatoes. You brought those documents into my dining room to humiliate my son in front of the church leadership. You brought your malice into my sanctuary to destroy my peace. But God protected us from your wickedness. God provided a way out, so we would not have to suffer the indignity of begging you for a single dime. Deacon Calvin cleared his throat, adjusting his collar uncomfortably. Sister Brenda, the deacon began, his deep pastoral voice trembling slightly. Taking out a reverse mortgage to pay off embezzled corporate funds is a highly concerning decision. We gathered here today to pray for your failing heart, not to celebrate financial maneuvering. Chloe immediately intercepted the deacon's concern, stepping out from behind my mother's chair to take center stage. She smoothed her hands over her expensive linen trousers and smiled a tight, condescending smile. Deacon Calvin, with all due respect, we need to view this through a lens of restorative justice, Chloe said smoothly, utilizing her soft, weaponized vocabulary to sanitize her husband's felonies. The banking system in this country is inherently oppressive. Trey was simply reallocating funds to bypass corporate red tape, and Brenda made an empowered choice to utilize her generational wealth to protect her black son from the prison industrial complex. We should be applauding her maternal resilience, not questioning her methods. Chloe turned her attention directly to me. She picked up her wine glass, wiping a stray drop from the base, and took a long, triumphant sip. Her blue eyes sparkled with the thrill of victory. She had secured her luxury lifestyle, protected her husband from prison, and successfully alienated me from the entire extended family in one swift maneuver. So you see, Kendra, you can pack up your little manila folders and go back to your lonely apartment, Chloe said, her tone dripping with venomous superiority. Your services are no longer required here. You tried to hold your money over our heads to force us into submission, but we navigated around you. We created a boundary against your toxic energy. You are completely irrelevant to this family's success. Chloe walked slowly around the mahogany table, stopping right in front of me. She leaned in close, the scent of her expensive perfume, mixing with the aroma of the Sunday dinner she had contributed absolutely nothing to prepare. You can leave now, Chloe whispered, ensuring her voice carried just enough for the front of the room to hear. We are going to finish our family dinner in peace. Do not worry about shutting the door behind you. Trey will make sure the locks are changed by tomorrow morning. You are not welcome on this property ever again. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. Aunt Valerie refused to look up. Uncle David crossed his arms and stared at the wall. The deacons remained seated, thoroughly paralyzed by the overwhelming toxicity radiating from my mother and my sister-in-law. They were all waiting for my reaction. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cry, to beg for my place back in the family, or to storm out in a dramatic fit of rage. They wanted me to shatter so they could sweep up the pieces and feel justified in their cruelty. I stood perfectly still. My feet were planted firmly on the hardwood floor. I looked at Chloe's smug, victorious face. I looked at Trey, who was leaning against the table with his arms crossed, grinning like a predator who had just cornered his prey. Finally, I looked at my mother, the woman who had spent 32 years draining my spirit and my bank accounts, looking back at me with nothing but absolute disdain. They thought they had won. They genuinely, wholeheartedly believed they had outsmarted a senior financial auditor by going to a local bank and signing a stack of mortgage documents. They believed they had bypassed my boundaries and secured $160,000 of free money against a house my mother claimed she owned free and clear. I processed the exact legal and financial implications of what they had just confessed to doing. I mapped out the chain of events that was about to unfold with devastating, irreversible precision. The sheer magnitude of the trap they had eagerly walked into was so beautiful, so perfectly symmetrical in its poetic justice, that my brain could barely contain the realization. I stared at them for a long, quiet moment. The silence stretched out, tightening the tension in the room until it was almost unbearable. Trey's grin faltered slightly. Chloe shifted her weight, suddenly unnerved by my complete lack of a reaction. And then it happened. A sound bubbled up from the very bottom of my chest. It started as a low, quiet breath, shaking my shoulders slightly. I tried to press my lips together to stop it, but the force of it was too strong. I opened my mouth and I burst into genuine, uncontrollable laughter. It was not a bitter chuckle. It was not a sarcastic, defensive scoff. It was a loud, booming, full-bodied laugh that echoed off the high ceilings and bounced against the crystal chandelier. I laughed so hard I had to put my hand on the back of a dining chair to steady myself. I laughed until my stomach ached and tears pricked the corners of my eyes. The entire room stared at me in absolute horrified confusion. My mother gripped the edge of the dining table, her face twisting in alarm. Trey dropped his arms to his sides, his arrogant posture instantly transforming into defensive panic. Chloe took a rapid step backward, looking at me as if I had completely lost my mind. I was not losing my mind. For the first time in my entire life, my mind was perfectly, gloriously clear. My laughter echoed against the vaulted ceiling of the dining room. I laughed until my ribs ached and tears gathered at the corners of my eyes. The sound was completely foreign in this house, a place usually suffocated by my mother's demands and my brother's inflated ego. The congregation of family members and church leaders stared at me as if I had suddenly sprouted a second head. Aunt Valerie gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. Deacon Calvin looked deeply unsettled, shifting his heavy frame in his chair. Trey dropped his arms to his sides. The smug, victorious grin that had been plastered across his face just moments ago began to melt away, replaced by a twitch of genuine uncertainty. Bullies only know how to function when their victims cower. When you laugh in their faces, their entire reality fractures. What is so funny? Trey barked, his voice pitching up an octave, betraying the panic he was trying to hide. You just lost your leverage, Kendra. We secured the money. We bypassed you completely. You have zero power here. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the last of my laughter fade into a sharp, terrifying smile. I wiped a stray tear of mirth from my cheek and stood perfectly straight. The icy, calculating auditor took full control of my body. I am laughing at you, Trey. I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. I am laughing because you stood there and called yourself a visionary. You called yourself an entrepreneur. You really thought you walked into a bank, outsmarted the system, and saved yourself. But you are not a visionary. You are just a desperate, sloppy criminal who refuses to read the fine print. Chloe slammed her hand flat against the table. Stop talking in riddles, Kendra, she snapped, though her blue eyes darted nervously toward the hallway as if looking for an escape route. Brenda got a reverse mortgage. The equity in this estate paid off the restitution. The wire cleared. You are just bitter because we do not need your permission to access generational wealth. I did not look at Chloe. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my mother. Brenda was sitting at the head of the table clutching her lace handkerchief, but her posture had gone rigid. The triumphant glow she had worn while praising her golden son was beginning to dim. A shadow of doubt crossed her face. She knew me. She knew I never bluffed. Mom, I said quietly, stepping forward. Do you remember 3 years ago when Trey convinced you to invest in his blockchain logistics company? Trey physically recoiled, taking a sudden step backward. Uncle David looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. I continued, making sure my voice carried clearly over the gravy-stained tablecloth. You gave him everything, Mom. You emptied your savings. You cashed out the life insurance policy Dad left you. And when Trey inevitably bankrupted that company 6 months later, you could not pay the property taxes on this beautiful, sprawling estate in Buckhead. That is family business. Brenda hissed, her voice trembling. She looked frantically at the deacons, desperate to keep her pristine image intact. We handled that privately. God provided a miracle. God did not provide a miracle, I corrected her sharply. I reached down to my black leather tote bag, which was still resting against the leg of my chair. I unzipped the hidden side compartment. My fingers wrapped around a single heavy folder bound in a dark blue cover. I pulled it out and held it up for the room to see. You fell 6 months behind on the mortgage, Mom, I announced to the silent room. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. You were terrified. You were going to lose the family legacy. You were going to be humiliated in front of the entire congregation. But then, right at the 11th hour, a private corporate buyer stepped in. A private investment firm purchased the debt, bought the house outright, and graciously allowed you to sign a lease agreement so you could stay here and save face. Deacon Calvin leaned forward, his heavy pastoral presence completely forgotten in the face of this financial scandal. Sister Brenda, is this true? The deacon asked. You lost the house 3 years ago. Brenda refused to look at him. She stared at the blue folder in my hand, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. It was an investment strategy, she stammered defensively. The private buyer offered a fixed rent. It was a blessing. I still manage the property. I still run this household. I walked slowly toward Uncle David. I placed the dark blue folder directly onto the table in front of him. Open it, Uncle David, I instructed. Read the name of the private investment firm that bought this estate 3 years ago. Read the name of the entity that my mother has been paying rent to every single month. Uncle David flipped open the heavy cover. The room was so quiet I could hear the rustle of the thick parchment paper. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the official county property deed. Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company, Uncle David read aloud. Chloe let out a loud, harsh sigh of relief. She crossed her arms and glared at me. So what? Chloe sneered. A faceless corporation owns the house. Brenda has a rock-solid lease agreement. She has tenant rights. You cannot evict her just because you are throwing a tantrum. The reverse mortgage still cleared. We still got the money. You proved absolutely nothing. I turned my head slowly to look at my white sister-in-law. The sheer blinding ignorance she possessed was staggering. Turn to the second page, Uncle David, I commanded gently. Read the name of the sole managing director and primary shareholder of Apex Holdings. Uncle David flipped the page. He froze. His thick shoulders dropped and all the color drained from his face. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and dawning horror. He looked at my mother, then back down at the paper. "Read it," I demanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "Kendra," Uncle David whispered, his voice hoarse. "Sole Managing Director Kendra." A deathly silence swallowed the dining room. Aunt Valerie covered her mouth with both hands. The deacons stared at me in complete disbelief. "I bought the house, Mom," I said, turning my gaze back to the woman sitting frozen at the head of the table. 3 years ago, when Trey gambled away your life savings, I stepped in. I created a blind trust. I used my corporate salary, my bonuses, and my investments to purchase this estate in cash before the bank could put it on the auction block. I did not do it for recognition. I did it to protect you from homelessness. I did it because despite everything you put me through, I was still the dumb, loyal daughter trying to buy her mother's love. Brenda began to shake. The lace handkerchief slipped from her fingers, fluttering silently to the hardwood floor. "No," she whispered, her voice completely hollow. "No," the lawyer said. The buyer was an overseas conglomerate. "You do not have that kind of money. You are just an auditor." "I am a senior financial auditor," I corrected her coldly. "I know exactly how to structure a blind trust to maintain absolute anonymity." "You have been writing rent checks to my corporate account for 36 months, Mom. You live in my house. You sleep under my roof. You sit at the head of a dining table in a property that belongs entirely legally and permanently to me." Trey stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a mahogany sideboard. His arrogant posture collapsed completely. The realization of what this actually meant was visibly crashing down on him. "Wait!" Chloe stammered, her voice suddenly frantic. She grabbed Trey's arm, shaking it. "Trey, wait. If Kendra owns the house, if she holds the deed." Chloe stopped speaking. Her blue eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked at Trey, then at my mother, the horrific mathematical equation finally solving itself in her entitled brain. I smiled. It was the coldest, most merciless smile I had ever worn. I leaned forward, resting both my hands on the gravy-stained tablecloth, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "That is right, Chloe," I whispered, ensuring every syllable echoed with crystal clarity. "Mom does not own this estate. She has not owned it for 3 years. She is just a tenant." Which brings us to the very interesting business transaction Trey bragged about 5 minutes ago. I stood up straight, addressing the entire room. "My brother just confessed in front of witnesses that he and my mother went to a bank yesterday morning. He proudly admitted that they secured a $160,000 cash advance using this property as collateral. But you cannot leverage equity on a property you do not own. You cannot sign a reverse mortgage unless you hold the deed." The absolute gravity of the situation slammed into the dining room like a freight train. "You forged the ownership documents, Mom," I said, my voice ringing out with undeniable authority. "You sat in a bank manager's office, you presented yourself as the legal owner of Apex Holdings, and you signed loan documents against my property. You bypassed my frozen accounts by committing first-degree federal bank fraud." The air in the dining room grew so heavy it felt like trying to breathe underwater. My words hung over the table, vibrating with the sheer weight of what had just been uncovered. I watched my mother's face. The defiant matriarch who had weaponized scripture and guilt for 32 years was completely gone. In her place sat a terrified, trembling woman who suddenly realized she had walked blindfolded into a legal minefield. Uncle David slowly lowered the property deed back onto the table, treating the document as if it were coated in poison. He looked at my mother, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. "You do not own the house, Brenda," Uncle David whispered, his deep voice cracking under the strain of the revelation. "You just told a room full of church deacons that you took out a mortgage on a house you do not own." I stepped closer to the table, making sure my presence dominated the room. "I need you all to understand exactly what happened here today," I announced, keeping my tone as clinical and detached as possible. "You did not take out a reverse mortgage on your house, Mom. You cannot leverage equity on a property when your name is not on the title. When you walked into that bank yesterday morning, you did not secure a loan. You committed a massive, undeniable felony." I watched Trey. His arrogant posture was crumbling in real time. He started shaking his head, taking quick, erratic breaths. "We used the old deed." Trey stammered, his voice pitching up in panic, completely forgetting his audience. "We found the old paperwork in the safe. We told the loan officer the title transfer to the limited liability company was a clerical error. We signed an affidavit claiming Mom was the primary beneficiary of the trust." I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You signed a sworn affidavit claiming ownership of Apex Holdings?" I asked, my voice slicing through the tension. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I am a senior financial auditor. I know exactly how these transactions are scrutinized. You bypassed my frozen accounts by creating fraudulent documents. You lied to a notary. You forged ownership records for a corporate entity that belongs entirely to me. You defrauded a federally insured banking institution out of $160,000. That is not a simple misunderstanding, Trey. That is first-degree bank fraud. It carries a maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. And you just confessed to all of it in front of the entire church board." The reality of the situation crashed into the room with the force of a wrecking ball. Chloe, who had been standing frozen behind my mother's chair, suddenly went completely pale. Her fingers went slack. The expensive crystal wine glass she had been swirling so smugly slipped from her grasp. It hit the hardwood floor with a violent, shattering crash. Deep red wine splashed across the polished wood, pooling around the legs of my mother's chair like a spreading stain of blood. But nobody looked down at the broken glass. Every single eye in the room was fixed on Trey. The golden child was finally breaking. The illusion of his entrepreneurial genius was dead. He was not a visionary who had outsmarted his bitter sister. He was a desperate, sloppy criminal who had just incriminated himself and his mother in a completely new, vastly more severe federal crime. His chest heaved. The veins in his neck bulged against his custom-tailored collar. He looked at the federal indictment papers still resting in the mashed potatoes. Then he looked at me. The sheer, unadulterated hatred in his eyes was blinding. "You set us up!" Trey roared, his voice tearing through the dining room. "You planned this. You kept the house a secret just so you could destroy us. You wanted to see me locked up." With a primal, animalistic scream, Trey lunged across the mahogany dining table. He did not care about the fine china or the Sunday feast. His knees crashed into the gravy boat, sending porcelain flying as he scrambled across the wood, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before Trey could even reach the centerpiece, the men in the room exploded into action. Uncle David, a man who worked construction for 40 years, moved with terrifying speed. He grabbed Trey by the back of his tailored suit jacket and yanked him backward with brute force. Deacon Calvin and Uncle James rushed forward, grabbing Trey's arms and wrestling him off the table. Plates crashed to the floor. Silverware scattered across the room. Trey thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities at me, his face twisted in absolute rage. "Let me go!" he screamed, spit flying from his lips as the three older men slammed him down into a chair, pinning his shoulders. "I am going to end her. She ruined everything. She is dead to me." My mother was hyperventilating now. She clutched her chest, but this time there was no theatrical performance. This was genuine, suffocating panic. She looked at her son, being restrained by the church elders, then looked at me, her eyes begging for a mercy she had never once shown me. "Kendra, please," my mother wailed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. "We did not know. We did not know it was your company. We just needed the money to save your brother. You have to fix this. You are a financial expert. You have to call the bank and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized it. You cannot let them take my baby away. You cannot let me go to jail." I ignored her pleas completely. She was still trying to make me the human shield for their catastrophic choices. My attention shifted entirely to Chloe. My white sister-in-law was backed against the arched entryway, her designer shoes stepping right into the puddle of spilled wine and broken crystal. Her carefully crafted facade of cultural superiority and weaponized therapy speak was entirely gone. She was trapped and she knew it. The money they had stolen from the bank was supposed to secure her luxury lifestyle, but instead it had tied her directly to a massive federal conspiracy. Chloe's hands were shaking violently as she dug into her designer handbag. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling awkwardly across the glowing screen. She looked at me, her blue eyes wide with desperate cornered malice. She had run out of elegant ways to manipulate the room, so she reverted to the most basic, predictable tactic she had left. "I am calling the police!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing over Trey's continued shouting and the sounds of struggling men. "You tricked us. You intentionally hid your assets to entrap this family. You knew they were desperate and you manipulated the situation to make them commit a crime. This is financial abuse, Kendra. You are an abusive, toxic person, and I am having you arrested right now." I stood amidst the absolute wreckage of my mother's perfect Sunday dinner. The smell of spilled wine and ruined food filled the air, replacing the comforting scent of a family gathering with the bitter stench of consequence. My brother was still struggling against the physical restraint of the church deacons, his suit torn and his dignity completely obliterated. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, rocking back and forth in her chair as the reality of her impending arrest settled over her. And my sister-in-law was holding her phone like a weapon, threatening me with the very justice system she was about to become intimately acquainted with. I looked at Chloe. I let a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. I tilted my head, matching the condescending posture she had given me just minutes prior. The power dynamic in the room had permanently shifted, and I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of her own hubris. "Please do, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying certainty that made her hand shake even harder. "Dial the number. Put the dispatcher on speakerphone. Tell them exactly where we are. Because I would absolutely love to show the responding authorities exactly whose signatures are on those forged bank documents." 2 days had passed since I walked out of my mother's dining room and left my family suffocating in the wreckage of their own criminal conspiracy. I gave them 48 hours to process the absolute reality that they were trapped. I fully expected them to panic. I expected frantic text messages, desperate voicemails, and perhaps even a groveling apology letter slipped under the door of my apartment. I did not expect the panic to walk directly through the revolving glass doors of my corporate headquarters. My auditing firm occupied the top 10 floors of a sleek high-rise in downtown Atlanta. The ground floor lobby was a vast, intimidating expanse of white marble, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows designed to project absolute authority and wealth. It was a space where silence and professionalism were strictly enforced by a team of highly trained security personnel. I was stepping out of the private elevator bank with a fresh cup of coffee in my hand when I heard a sound that completely violated the sterile quiet of the building. It was the high-pitched, frantic, and entirely performative sound of a woman crying. Not just crying, but actively weeping for an audience. I recognized the voice instantly. I turned the corner and saw Chloe standing directly in front of the main security desk. She was wearing a wrinkled beige linen blazer and oversized designer sunglasses, her blonde hair messy and unkempt. She was slamming her hand against the polished stone counter, demanding that the security guards let her up to the executive floors. "You do not understand," Chloe wailed, her voice echoing off the marble walls and drawing the attention of every corporate employee walking through the turnstiles. "I am family. It is an absolute emergency. She is destroying our lives and I need to speak to her right now." The two security guards were speaking to her in low, firm tones, instructing her to lower her voice and step away from the secure access point. Chloe was refusing to listen. She threw her hands in the air, playing the role of the frantic, traumatized victim to absolute perfection. I did not hide. I did not turn around and go back up the elevator to avoid the embarrassment. I walked slowly and deliberately across the center of the lobby, the sharp click of my heels cutting through the sound of her theatrical sobbing. "You have exactly 1 minute to leave this building before I instruct security to have you arrested for trespassing," I said, my voice cold, steady, and carrying clearly across the open space. Chloe spun around. She whipped off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red, puffy, and wide with desperate malice. She pointed a shaking finger at my face, abandoning her conversation with the guards entirely. "How could you do this to us?" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking as she marched toward me. "You evil, vindictive woman. You went to the bank. You froze the transfer. We got a notification this morning that the escrow account was flagged for fraudulent activity. You ruined everything." I stopped walking, planting my feet firmly on the marble floor and maintaining a protective distance between us. "I did not ruin anything, Chloe. I simply notified a federally insured banking institution that my mother forged ownership documents to secure a loan on a property that legally belongs to my corporate trust. I am a senior financial auditor. Did you genuinely believe I would let you commit mortgage fraud on my estate and just look the other way? Chloe let out a loud, hysterical sob, burying her face in her hands for a brief second before throwing her arms out wide to address the growing crowd of onlookers in the lobby. Several analysts and junior executives had stopped near the coffee kiosk watching the spectacle unfold in stunned silence. Chloe saw the audience and immediately leaned into her weaponized vocabulary, attempting to use my own race and community against me in the middle of a corporate workspace. "You are destroying a beautiful black family," Chloe cried out, her voice dripping with extreme manufactured agony. "You are tearing down your own community because you are obsessed with capitalism. Your brother is a good man who just needs a second chance, and you are actively working with a corrupt system to put him in a cage. You are a traitor to your own people, Kendra. You are sitting up here in this glass tower acting like you are better than where you came from, but you are just a toxic, bitter sellout." The sheer audacity of a white woman standing in the lobby of my firm, lecturing me about the destruction of the black family while actively trying to steal my life savings was almost breathtaking. She was using the exact buzzwords she had learned on social media, twisting them into a weapon to assassinate my character in front of my professional peers. "I am going to expose you," Chloe threatened, taking another aggressive step forward. "I am going to go on the internet today. I am going to make a video and tell the entire world exactly what kind of monster you are. I will tell them how you financially abuse your elderly mother and how you conspired to lock up your own brother. I will tag your employer. I will tag your clients. I will ruin your reputation and make sure you never work in this city again. I will cancel you, Kendra. I will burn your career to the ground." Before I could even open my mouth to respond to her ridiculous threats, the heavy glass doors of the ground floor executive suite swung open. My managing director, Vivian, stepped out into the lobby. Vivian was a formidable, sharply dressed woman who commanded absolute respect and did not tolerate a single ounce of foolishness in her building. She had built her career by tearing apart corporate embezzlers, and she possessed an uncanny ability to read a room in a fraction of a second. She walked briskly toward the security desk, her eyes darting between me, the security guards, and the weeping woman, causing a massive disruption. "Kendra," Vivian said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Is there a problem down here? Do we need to involve law enforcement?" Chloe saw Vivian approach and immediately recognized her as someone in a position of power. In a split second, Chloe pivoted her entire strategy. She turned her back on me and rushed toward Vivian, clasping her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture, playing the ultimate damsel in distress seeking protection from a superior authority. "Please, you have to help us," Chloe sobbed, looking at my boss with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You need to know who you are employing. Kendra is a dangerous, abusive person. She is holding her mother hostage financially. She is trying to send my innocent husband to prison over a family misunderstanding. She is a monster who uses her knowledge of the banking system to terrorize her own relatives. You cannot allow someone this unethical to work for your firm. She needs to be fired." Vivian stopped walking. She looked at Chloe, taking in the wrinkled blazer, the hysterical tears, and the frantic accusations. Then Vivian looked past Chloe and made direct eye contact with me. Vivian did not look concerned. She looked deeply annoyed by the interruption of her morning. "Vivian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional, "I apologize for the disruption in the lobby. This is my sister-in-law, Chloe. She is currently a suspect in an active federal wire fraud and bank fraud investigation, and she is apparently here to engage in witness tampering." Chloe gasped, spinning around to face me, her mouth dropping open in shock. "You see, Vivian?" I continued, speaking loudly and clearly, so every single person in the lobby could hear the absolute truth. "Chloe and my brother recently discovered that my brother is facing a 10-year federal prison sentence for embezzling $160,000 from his previous employer. In order to pay his restitution, Chloe and my brother convinced my mother to forge ownership documents on a property that belongs to my blind trust. They attempted to secure a fraudulent reverse mortgage to cover up his initial felony." "That is a lie!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing wildly. "She is making all of this up to protect her ego." I did not stop. I stepped directly into Chloe's personal space, forcing her to look me in the eye. I stripped away every single layer of her fake performative activism and laid her true motives bare right there on the marble floor. You did not come here because you care about saving a beautiful black family, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that cut deeper than a scream. You came here because you are terrified. You married my brother because you saw my mother wearing expensive clothes and living in a massive estate. You thought you were marrying into generational wealth. You thought you had secured a luxury lifestyle where you would never have to work a day in your life. Chloe's chest heaved. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The truth was paralyzing her. But there is no wealth. I continued, dismantling her entire existence piece by piece. My brother is a broke, unemployed felon. My mother is a broke, unemployed tenant living in a house that I own. There is no money, Chloe. There is no legacy. The only thing you married into was a massive pile of debt and a federal indictment. And instead of walking away, you decided to become a co-conspirator. You helped them forge bank documents because you were desperate to keep your trips to Tulum and your designer handbags. You are not a savior. You are a greedy, entitled fraud who just realized she tied her life to a sinking ship. The lobby was dead silent. The security guards stood frozen. The onlookers were entirely captivated by the brutal surgical precision of the takedown. Vivian stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, watching Chloe unravel completely. You threatened to go on the internet and ruin my career, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Please, Chloe, go live right now. Tell the world exactly how you incorporated medical recovery, limited liability company, to try and steal your black sister-in-law's retirement fund. Tell your followers how you sat in a hospital room and told my mother to fake a heart attack. Let us see how quickly your online community cancels you when they find out you are an active participant in a federal bank fraud conspiracy. Chloe stared at me. The tears had completely stopped. The hysterical, weaponized crying vanished, leaving nothing but the raw, naked panic of a woman who finally understood that she had absolutely no leverage left. She looked at Vivian, but my boss simply raised an eyebrow, offering zero sympathy. Chloe looked at the security guards who were already stepping forward to remove her from the premises. She was completely exposed. Her public facade was shattered. Her husband was going to prison, and her luxury lifestyle was nothing but a mirage. She had walked into my sanctuary to destroy my life, and I had just dismantled hers in front of an audience. The silence in the towering marble lobby was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that typically follows a massive, catastrophic explosion. Chloe stood completely frozen in the center of the polished floor. Her expensive designer bag hung limply from her wrist, and her tear-stained face had rapidly drained to a sickly, unnatural shade of gray. The junior executives, financial analysts, and corporate clients who had stopped by the coffee kiosk to watch the spectacle were completely motionless. Even Vivian, my managing director, stood with her arms crossed, watching the psychological dismantling of this woman with clinical approving precision. I did not give Chloe a single second to recover her breath. I did not allow her the space to formulate a new, elaborate lie. I turned away from her trembling figure and walked directly toward the massive interactive digital display board that dominated the east wall of our corporate lobby. It was a state-of-the-art presentation screen typically used to display global market indices and welcoming messages for visiting investors. I reached into my black leather tote bag, pulled out a small adapter cable, and plugged my sleek silver tablet directly into the primary presentation port. The massive screen flickered for a fraction of a second. The glowing blue corporate logo vanished completely. In its place, a highly magnified, high-definition scan of a bank routing document illuminated the entire lobby. The stark white background and heavy black text cast a harsh, unforgiving light across Chloe's horrified face. I stepped back from the console and gestured toward the glowing 10-foot screen. Chloe gasped aloud, bringing both hands up to cover her mouth as she stared at the 50-foot projection of her own financial treason. I made sure every single person in the room could read the bold print. I tapped my tablet screen, highlighting the receiving account information in a bright neon yellow. Let us look at the exact anatomy of your greed, Chloe, I said. My voice projected with clear, steady authority, bouncing off the glass walls. When my brother and my mother sat in that bank manager's office forging ownership documents, they genuinely believed the reverse mortgage funds were going into a joint legal defense account. Trey thought he was securing his freedom. My mother thought she was protecting her golden child from the federal justice system. But they made the fatal mistake of letting you handle the final paperwork. I swiped my finger across the tablet, transitioning the screen to a secondary bank document. This one showed a complex web of wire transfers. You are the one who filled out the final wire transfer instructions. I continued walking slowly back toward her rigid form. You did not route that $160,000 to a defense attorney. You did not route it to Trey's compliance officer. You did not even route it to the joint checking account you share with your husband. I tapped the screen one more time. The projection zoomed in aggressively on the final beneficiary line. The name Chloe Elizabeth Vance filled the display in massive, undeniable lettering. You routed every single penny of that fraudulent loan into a private individual offshore checking account where you are the sole authorized signer, I announced to the silent lobby. You completely bypassed your husband. You bypassed the woman who risked everything to secure the money. You stole the stolen money, Chloe. You orchestrated a secondary layer of fraud just to ensure you could secure your own escape fund when the federal agents finally showed up at your doorstep. Chloe began to shake violently, her knees knocked together. The undeniable proof of her betrayal was glowing behind me, brighter than the morning sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked around wildly, hoping anyone in the gathered crowd, would offer her a lifeline. She searched for a sympathetic face, but the corporate professionals staring back at her held nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. She had tried to weaponize social justice and race against me, and now her own blinding greed was on public display. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register that commanded absolute attention. You thought you could outmaneuver an entire family. You married Trey because you saw the massive brick estate in Buckhead. You saw the tailored suits, the luxury cars, and the prestigious church titles. You did not marry Trey for love. You married him for money that never existed. I took a deliberate step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. You thought you could extract generational wealth from a black family, and then play the innocent, fragile victim when you finally got caught. You thought you could take the money and run, while my mother and my brother took the fall. But all you did was attach your own legal signature to a massive federal banking conspiracy. Now you are going to federal prison with him. The threat of federal prison shattered whatever fragile illusion of control Chloe had left. The performative allyship, the weaponized therapy, speak the arrogant cultural superiority. It all evaporated in a single devastating instant. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed to her knees right there on the cold marble floor. The expensive beige linen blazer crumpled around her shoulders. Kendra, please, she sobbed loudly. But this time the tears were absolutely real. They were the ugly, desperate, messy tears of a cornered animal realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. I can fix this. I can make it right. Just turn the screen off. Please, I am begging you, just turn the screen off. I stared down at her kneeling form, feeling nothing but a profound, icy detachment. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that she was reduced to crawling on the floor of my workplace. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my tailored trousers with trembling fingers. I will give you everything, Chloe begged, her voice echoing frantically through the lobby as she stared up at me. I will divorce Trey today. I swear to you, I will sign the divorce papers this afternoon. I will testify against him. I will testify against Brenda. I will go to the federal investigators and tell them exactly how they planned the whole thing from the very beginning. I will give them the timelines, the forged signatures, everything. I will be your star witness. She tugged on my pant leg, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. Just let me keep the money, Kendra. I need that money to start over. I cannot go to prison. I cannot lose my life over their stupidity. Please just let me walk away with the cash, and I will hand your mother and your brother to the authorities on a silver platter. The entire lobby let out a collective gasp of disbelief. In a matter of minutes, Chloe had gone from violently defending a beautiful, resilient family to eagerly offering to sell her husband and her mother-in-law to the federal government for a cash payout. Vivian let out a sharp, humorless scoff from across the room, shaking her head at the absolute lack of loyalty. I looked down at Chloe, feeling a wave of intense satisfaction wash over me. I reached down and gently pulled my pant leg out of her desperate, grasping hands. I stepped back, severing the physical contact. I reached into my leather tote bag one final time. I pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope sealed with a bright red legal sticker. "I am not a federal prosecutor, Chloe," I said calmly, dropping the heavy envelope directly into her lap. "I do not need you to testify against them. I am an auditor. I already have all the financial evidence I need, and the authorities will easily find the rest." Chloe stared down at the red sticker, her hands shaking too badly to open the envelope. "What you are holding right now is a formal legal notice," I explained, making sure my voice carried to the security guards. "Since you and Trey are currently occupying a residential property owned entirely by Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company, I am exercising my right as the sole property owner. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises." Chloe let out a strangled, breathless sound. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with total devastation. "You are being evicted, Chloe," I stated clearly. "You have 30 days to pack your designer bags and get out of my house. After that, whatever items you leave behind will be thrown in a dumpster." I signaled the two security guards standing near the front desk. They did not hesitate. They immediately stepped forward, grabbing Chloe firmly by the arms and hauling her to her feet. She was too stunned to fight back. She clutched the eviction notice to her chest, her body completely limp as they began to march her toward the revolving glass doors. "Enjoy your 30 days." "Chloe," I called out, turning my back on her and walking toward the executive elevators. "And good luck explaining to Trey why you tried to steal his getaway fund." 30 days had passed since I handed Chloe that eviction notice on the polished marble floor of my corporate lobby. 30 days of absolute deafening silence from the estate in Buckhead. I knew exactly what that silence meant. My mother was operating under the delusion that I was playing a game of chicken. In Brenda's mind, a daughter simply did not evict her own mother. The hierarchy of our household dictated that no matter how much I threatened, I would eventually fold under the sacred weight of blood obligation. She was so entirely convinced of my submission that she decided to double down on her flawless public image. I parked my car half a block away, watching the spectacle unfold through the wrought iron gates. The catering vans were parked illegally on the street. A massive white canvas tent had been erected on my manicured lawn. A classical string quartet was playing near the rose bushes I paid to have landscaped. My mother had invited the entire congregation, the church deacons, Uncle David, Aunt Valerie, and every high society contact she possessed. She called it a vow renewal ceremony for Trey and Chloe. In reality, it was a massive, expensive theatrical production designed to prove to the community that their wealth was untouchable and their family was impenetrable. They were serving butter-poached lobster and expensive champagne. Chloe was wearing a custom silk gown that probably maxed out another one of Trey's fraudulent credit cards. Trey stood beside her in a crisp white tuxedo jacket, playing the role of the triumphant, successful husband. My mother drifted through the crowd in a lavender designer dress, laughing loudly and accepting compliments about her beautiful home. She was hosting a party on my property, using my lawn as a stage to celebrate the very people who had tried to bankrupt me. It was the ultimate display of absolute blinding arrogance. I did not walk through the gates alone. I had spent the last 30 days meticulously coordinating this exact moment with surgical precision. Stepping out of the unmarked vehicles behind me were two uniformed sheriff deputies from the Fulton County Civil Division carrying official lockout orders. Flanking them was a team of 6 professional movers wearing matching gray uniforms, carrying heavy-duty packing boxes and industrial dollies. Standing directly to my right was Special Agent Vance from the Federal Financial Crimes Division, holding a thick leather briefcase containing 2 federal arrest warrants. We waited just out of sight, near the side entrance of the garden. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. Through the manicured hedges, I watched Chloe tap a silver spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The string quartet slowly faded into silence. The wealthy guests turned their attention toward the floral archway where Chloe and Trey stood holding hands. Chloe raised her glass high into the air, her face glowing with manufactured humility. She looked out over the crowd of church members and extended relatives, her voice trembling with perfect practiced emotion. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Chloe began projecting her voice so it carried across the entire lawn. This past month has tested our family in ways we never imagined. We faced spiritual attacks. We faced targeted negativity from people who wanted to see us fail. But looking at my beautiful husband and looking at my incredible mother-in-law Brenda, I am reminded that Black excellence and family resilience can survive any storm. We leaned on our faith, we leaned on our communal wealth, and we proved that love will always conquer toxic jealousy. A warm round of applause rippled through the crowd. Aunt Valerie dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Uncle David raised his glass in solemn agreement. My mother beamed, radiating pure, unadulterated pride as she looked at her golden son and his devoted wife. They were completely intoxicated by their own fabricated reality. I gave a swift, silent nod to the sheriff deputies. I pushed the heavy wrought iron side gate open. The metal hinges groaned loudly, a sharp, abrasive sound that cut directly through the polite applause. I stepped onto the pristine green grass of my own backyard. I wore a tailored crimson pantsuit, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely void of any hesitation. The deputies stepped in right behind me, their utility belts clinking in the sudden deafening quiet. The moving crew marched in next, their heavy work boots tearing into the soft turf. Special Agent Vance brought up the rear, his face a mask of absolute federal authority. The transition in the atmosphere was instantaneous and violent. The applause died in the throats of the guests. The polite smiles froze and shattered. Deacon Calvin, who was standing near the buffet table with a plate of lobster, dropped his fork onto the grass. Uncle David took a rapid step backward, his eyes darting between the uniformed officers and my face. Trey saw the police officers first. The arrogant, triumphant posture he had been holding just seconds ago vanished completely. His shoulders dropped. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He instinctively let go of Chloe's hand and took a frantic step toward the back of the tent. Chloe stood frozen at the microphone, her arms still raised in the air, her crystal champagne flute trembling violently. Her blue eyes widened in sheer naked terror as she processed the presence of federal law enforcement at her vow renewal. My mother's reaction was the most telling. Brenda did not look at the police. She did not look at the federal agent. She looked directly at me. Her lavender dress seemed to swallow her suddenly fragile frame. The delusion she had been clinging to for 30 days finally shattered against the concrete reality standing on her lawn. She realized in that singular terrifying moment that I was not bluffing. The 30-day eviction notice was not a negotiation tactic. It was a legally binding countdown, and the clock had just struck 0. "What is the meaning of this?" Aunt Valerie shrieked, stepping forward in a desperate attempt to maintain the family hierarchy. "You cannot bring the police to a private family celebration, Kendra. Have you completely lost your mind?" I did not look at Aunt Valerie. I did not acknowledge the gasps of the church congregation or the panicked whispers of the high society guests. I walked with slow, deliberate purpose straight down the center aisle of the white canvas tent, cutting directly through the crowd of people who had spent my entire life judging me. The guests parted like the Red Sea, scrambling out of my way as the sheriff deputies matched my pace. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from the floral archway. I looked at Chloe, whose hand was shaking so badly the champagne was spilling over the rim of her glass and dripping onto her expensive silk gown. I reached out and calmly wrapped my fingers around the microphone stand. I pulled the microphone directly out of her trembling hand. I turned my back on my brother and his wife. I faced the crowd of stunned, silent guests. The power dynamic in the family had not just shifted. It had been entirely dismantled, paved over, and rebuilt in my image. "Thank you all so much for coming out this afternoon," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive speakers set up around the yard. I spoke with icy, undeniable authority, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "I know you are all invited here today to celebrate family resilience and generational wealth. I am afraid there has been a slight change to the program. You are not here to witness a vow renewal. You are here to witness the foreclosure of a massive multi-layered financial fraud. A shockwave of horrified murmurs rolled through the crowd. I saw church deacons grabbing their wives by the arm, already preparing to sprint for the valet parking. I turned slightly, gesturing toward the beautiful brick estate towering behind the white canvas tent. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Kendra. I am the sole managing director of Apex Holdings Limited Liability Company. I am the exclusive legal owner of this entire estate. Exactly 30 days ago, I served the individuals standing behind me with a formal non-negotiable eviction notice. They chose to ignore a lawful court order and throw a catered party on my property instead. Today they are being forcibly removed from the premises. I gave a sharp nod to the foreman of the moving crew. Gentlemen, I said clearly, you may begin clearing the property. Everything inside the house goes directly into the dumpsters out front. The 6 burly movers did not hesitate. They marched past the frozen guests, opened the heavy French doors of the patio, and walked directly into the house. The sound of moving boxes being snapped open and furniture being dragged across the hardwood floors echoed out into the yard. "You cannot do this!" my mother screamed. The sound tore from her throat, a raw, primal shriek of absolute desperation. She shoved her way through the crowd, her lavender dress catching on a rose bush and tearing loudly. "This is my home. This is the family legacy. You are embarrassing us in front of the entire congregation. Stop them right now, Kendra. I am commanding you as your mother." I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, freezing detachment. "You lost the right to command me the day you faked a heart attack to steal my life savings," I replied, my voice slicing through her hysterical cries. "You do not have a legacy, Mom. You have a lease agreement that expired at midnight." Trey suddenly lunged forward. His fists clenched, his face twisted in desperate rage. He tried to shove past Special Agent Vance, his golden child arrogance blinding him to the reality of the badge. "You think you can just throw us on the street?" Trey roared. "I will sue you for everything you have. I will drag you through the courts for years." Special Agent Vance did not even flinch. He smoothly stepped into Trey's path, raising his hands in a swift, practiced motion. He grabbed Trey by the shoulders and spun him around, slamming him face first into one of the thick wooden poles supporting the floral archway. "You are not going to be suing anyone for a very long time," Special Agent Vance stated, his voice booming with federal authority. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and locked them tightly around Trey's wrists. The sharp metallic click silenced the entire yard. "You are under arrest for first-degree corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it." Trey's knees buckled. The crisp white tuxedo jacket pulled awkwardly against the restraints. He looked around wildly, his eyes searching the crowd for someone to save him. He looked at Uncle David, but his uncle turned his back and walked quickly toward the driveway. He looked at Aunt Valerie, but she was already rushing toward her car, refusing to be associated with a public federal arrest. The golden child had finally fallen, and the enablers were scattering like roaches in the light. Chloe saw the handcuffs close around her husband's wrists and completely snapped. The calculated, manipulative woman who had tried to ruin my career in a corporate lobby vanished. Pure, unadulterated survival instinct took over. She dropped the microphone stand, hiked up the skirt of her expensive silk gown, and bolted. She sprinted across the manicured grass, kicking off her designer heels as she made a desperate, frantic dash toward the back wrought iron gate. She did not make it 10 feet. The 2 sheriff deputies moved with lightning speed, cutting off her escape path. They grabbed her by the arms, stopping her momentum so abruptly she nearly toppled over into a tray of catered appetizers. "Get your hands off me!" Chloe shrieked, kicking wildly at the officers. "I am a victim. He forced me to sign those papers. I am a white woman. You cannot do this to me. I want my lawyer." Special Agent Vance walked over to her, pulling a second set of handcuffs from his briefcase. "You are the primary signatory on a fraudulent reverse mortgage, Chloe," he said calmly, securing her wrists behind her back despite her thrashing. "You routed stolen bank funds across state lines into a private offshore account. You are going to federal lockup right alongside your husband." The officers began marching Trey and Chloe across the lawn, hauling them past the horrified faces of the high society guests and the church deacons. The caterers were hastily packing up their equipment, terrified of being caught in the crossfire of a federal raid. The moving crew was hauling my mother's velvet armchairs out the front door and tossing them unceremoniously into the giant steel dumpsters waiting in the driveway. The entire facade of my family's wealth and superiority was being dismantled piece by piece in broad daylight. Brenda watched her golden son being shoved into the back of a marked law enforcement vehicle. She watched her expensive furniture being thrown into the trash. The reality of her absolute destruction finally broke through her decades of delusion. She collapsed. Her knees hit the manicured grass with a heavy thud. The pristine lavender dress crumpled around her. She looked up at me, her face streaked with mascara, and tears, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. The arrogance was gone. The manipulation was gone. There was nothing left but a desperate, broken woman who had played her final card and lost everything. "Kendra, please," my mother sobbed, her voice a ragged, agonizing wail. She reached out her hands, grasping at the empty air between us. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot do this to me. Where will I go? I have no money. I have no credit. You cannot leave me out here with nothing. Please, I am begging you. Have mercy on me." I stood over her, feeling the warm afternoon sun on my face. For 32 years, I had craved her approval. I had twisted myself into knots trying to be the daughter she wanted, funding her lifestyle, paying her debts, and swallowing her insults. But looking down at her now, kneeling in the grass of the estate I owned, I realized I did not need her approval anymore. I did not need her love. I was completely, fundamentally free. I looked down at the woman who had bled me dry her entire life. My voice was perfectly steady, carrying no anger, no sorrow, and no hesitation. "You are not left with nothing, Mom," I said quietly. "You have exactly what you invested in. You have Trey." I did not wait for her response. I turned my back on her weeping form. I walked straight across the lawn, the grass crunching softly beneath my heels. I walked past the shocked guests, past the deputies loading my brother into a squad car, and past the movers clearing out the last remnants of a toxic history. I walked out the heavy wrought iron gates and let them swing shut behind me with a loud, definitive clang. I got into my car. I put the engine in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the chaos, the screaming, and the flashing police lights far behind me in the rearview mirror. I merged onto the highway, heading toward a dinner reservation downtown. I was meeting Nurse Jackie, my managing director Vivian, and the close friends who had stood by me when my blood relatives tried to destroy me. I was driving toward my true chosen family. I was finally free, I was wealthy, and for the first time in my entire life, I was entirely at peace. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that toxic family members will always try to weaponize your loyalty to fund their own dysfunction. For years, I was conditioned to believe that being a good daughter meant sacrificing my boundaries and my bank account to protect a golden child who refused to save himself. But blood does not entitle anyone to your hard-earned success, and sharing DNA is never an excuse for financial abuse. True empowerment comes when you stop seeking validation from people who are fiercely committed to misunderstanding you. By prioritizing my financial independence and walking away from their manipulative lies, I did not lose a family. I gained my absolute freedom. You cannot heal people who are actively trying to destroy you, but you can always choose to fiercely protect yourself. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your peace and your future? Share your story in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power.